la parte final de la agenda. Por supuesto, es una sesión de media hora con Schwartz, nuestro presidente y director ejecutivo de Sun Market Systems. Comenzamos hoy con unas palabras de bienvenida, seguidas por la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. Y como solamente tenemos media hora, pues les sugiero también que den oportunidad para sus colegas. Otra cosita que les quiero recordar es que estamos ahora en periodo callado, de acuerdo con leyes norteamericanas, relacionadas a las ganancias, porque ya estamos como 2 semanas afuera de reportar nuestras ganancias para el Q1. Ana y Martin nos hablarán, comenzamos con Jonathan. Jonathan, if you can please give us...
a translator?
Absolutely. For you, you can speak in English. If you can help give some brief welcome remarks, and then we'll do some Q&A.
Great. So first of all, thank you very much for taking the time out of your schedules to come spend with us. We really do appreciate it. And hopefully this will be a useful and valuable insight into what's going on, not only inside of Sun, but in the markets that we serve, to the extent that anybody can give you an accurate depiction of what's going on. I think we're seeing one thing universally across the world, which is just an exceptional appetite for change. And that's not simply driven by the innovations that Sun is making available. That's being driven by an economic change in the marketplace, which at this point is a largely negative change. But pressure in the system yields an appetite for change. And we've certainly seen, whether it's the financial services community, the retailers that we talk to, the governments that we talk to, pretty much everyone is revisiting historical assumptions, examining new alternatives, and in an odd way, we're actually seeing this as a tremendous opportunity, because a lot of decisions that looked completely safe and stable last year are now up in the air, being re-examined, and that means we have a new opportunity, a new set of markets and customers, and like I said before, just a wholesale new appetite for change. So if I were to highlight 2 areas in specific where we see customers interested in talking to us, one of them is that coffee mug right there, which is just what's going on. Historically, a big portion of the expense was in a proprietary operating system and a hardware architecture that was then opened up with an open source operating system, initially Linux. That led to a wholesale change in around the 2001 timeframe. Since then, we've obviously embraced that change pervasively, and not just a little bit, but our core operating system, our core application infrastructure, our core programming environment, Java, Solaris, the acquisition of MySQL. We now are definitively the world's leader in providing open source infrastructure for data centers and for developers. So that one trend right now across the world is on every CIO's mind, which is, how else can I look to open source to change my operating economics? One area that we see them specifically interested in the category of open source is databases. Databases typically represent 60 to 80% of the total costs of operating an enterprise infrastructure. And to the extent that we can take that from a $20 billion industry to a $5 billion industry, that means we can save our customers $15 billion across the world. And if we can then build $1 billion business out of what remains, that's all upside for Sun. So MySQL represents a tremendous savings opportunity, a tremendous opportunity to embrace the innovation that's out there in the open source community, and by every definition, it is already wildly successful. I mean, every customer we talk to, and I'll give you one example in a moment, is already using MySQL and is now beginning to see it as a real alternative to the traditional proprietary databases. The second trend is a fairly obvious one, which is that the price of power is becoming much more obvious to our customers around the world. And to the extent we can create the most energy efficient systems infrastructure, whether that is storage or servers or high-scale, high-performance computing facilities, that represents differentiation for Sun. The fact that we know how to, for example, incorporate flash memory into our systems and into our storage not only means they get to be 10 times or 100 times faster than our competitors, but they also don't require electricity anymore, because flash obviously doesn't require constant power. The fact that we have a tape business. Oddly enough, we're seeing a tremendous uptake of tape in high-performance computing, genomic modeling, and social networking. Traditionally, tape was all about insurance companies and government records. Now we're seeing it move into these new markets, in part because of its energy profile. Once you create a lot of data, you may not want to keep it online all the time. If you use tape, it no longer requires power. So those two really are the bookends of a new approach to the marketplace that Sun is somewhat uniquely positioned to deliver. We lead in the open source community with a full line of open source innovations, and we lead with systems innovations that we like to believe are the most energy efficient in the marketplace. So the good news is, as I said, there's an appetite for change, and we'd like to believe we can go provide the kinds of solutions that give customers a very different perspective on their choices. And I'll just leave you with one great customer story, or I think it's a great customer story. I was at an investor conference recently, meeting with the head of technology for a very large global institution. And this is an institution that employs 15 or 20,000 technologists around the world. And typically, when I go to visit customers, I get a report from our account teams of what business we're doing with them today, and also what technologies they're using based on their downloads. Because we obviously watch to see, XYZ.com has downloaded the following products. It gives us insight into what they're interested in. And I knew ahead of my visit with this customer that they were running MySQL. They had about 4,000 downloads of MySQL over the past 12 months. And so I began my discussions with this customer, and I asked him how we were doing for them, and he said, "You're actually doing very well. Solaris has become the default operating system for our institution. We'd like to talk to you about where else we can take it. We're very happy with your virtualization." So it was a great discussion. Everything was perfect. And then I said, "And how are we doing, for you with MySQL?" And he looked at me and he said, "I banned it." And I said, "Why did you ban MySQL?" And he said, "Because we have a global standard. The global standard is not MySQL. I don't want to support, more than, the databases I've already put into deployment." And I thought, that's not a very good topic of conversation. I'll think of something else to talk about. And he said, "But my ban failed." And I said, why did your ban fail? He said, "Because everybody uses MySQL. Every student we had coming out of college to join us, every prototype application, every new application, they didn't want to bother going through procurement, so they just built, applications on MySQL. So now I'd like to talk to you about a global license to put it into mission-critical deployment." And that is somewhat a good example of the change that's occurring in the marketplace. Some of the change is top-down. Some of the change is bottom-up. And I think what we'd like to believe is we can provide